billions of people set New Year's resolutions and goals. But did you know that 92% fail to achieve those goals, and by the second month of the year, nearly half of those who set goals have already given up? While that might sound crazy, it's not surprising. We all know the same people who set the same resolutions each year and still feel no closer to those changes 10 years later. It's easy to blame the individual, but what about the system they use? We've been programmed to believe that goals are the optimal way to achieve progress and performance. But what if this doesn't work for everyone? James Clear, the famous author of Atomic Habits, once said, "You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems." And he might be right. So today, we're going to explore an alternative to find success in whatever it is you do. We're going to explore why you should use principles, not goals, to thrive and survive in this game of life. First up, let's talk about what I call the non-obvious prison of goals and resolutions. Before anyone grabs their pitchforks and fire, I'm not saying goals are awful. Every tool has its time and place. If you want to use goals for work, life, and your career, that's great. What I'm offering here is an alternative to the status quo. But context is key with everything. So at the end of the day, do what works for you. Now, with that out of the way, here's why I'm not a big fan of goals and resolutions. They often force a success or fail mentality. They prioritize immediate and definitive outcomes over enduring habits. For the most part, they can be quite rigid. Life changes, and as such, our goals must do that too. And the big one, 90% of people don't ever recognize their starting place, nor the environment, mindset, and motivators needed to achieve whatever it is they set. Now let's talk about why set principles, not goals. So this is the controversial bit, right? Instead of huge list of goals, personally, I build, revisit, and refresh an annual set of principles. I'm not the first person to do this. There are many, many people who do this in successful and small businesses and all different types of ventures. And again, like I said before, this isn't for everyone. So don't feel pressure to use it if it doesn't work for you. Context is everything. And that might just be my word of 2025 too. So I use principles to shape and guide my behavior, reasoning, and decisions across businesses, finance, well-being, and more. For me, I thrive in that framework of principles because they encourage me to do the right things consistently rather than just kind of chasing all these defined endpoints. Now, a lot of this does come down to personal motivation. Principles motivate me more than goals. Now, to give you a quick definition of principles, if you've never heard them before, of course, I asked my good friend ChatGPT, who said,
"A principle is a fundamental truth, belief, or proposition that serves as the foundation for a system of behavior, reasoning, and understanding. They act as guiding rules or standards to shape decisions, actions, and judgments across various contexts."
Why use them? And as both AI says, and I've said previously, look at principles as guiding frameworks. So rather than being fixed targets like goals, they can serve as touchstones that influence your actions and decisions. Goals are more focused on what you do, and principles are about who you want to be. So let me give you an example. I could set a goal of reading 5 books a year, which is never going to happen, by the way. Or I could set a principle like I'm going to dedicate more time to exploring new knowledge and applying it meaningfully. If this all sounds good and you want to kind of explore this versus goal setting, what can you do? Here's how to craft your own principles. I look at this in 5 steps. You want to reflect or establish your values. You want to define your commitments. You want to keep your principles visible, and don't be afraid to change them. And lastly, use them daily. Let's unpack these in a little more detail. So after this video, you can go and experiment with this yourself. Establish your values. Now, let's be honest, this is never an easy task. It's something I always hated being asked when I was younger and I started off in my career. For some reason, as I age, it's made it easier to define them. Your principles should reflect your personal values, by the way, not external expectations. A really simple way I found to do this is by identifying the things that truly matter to you, whatever they may be. The second is defining commitments. This is about how we translate those values into guiding principles. So we've already said we're not in the business of confining ourselves to a rigid goal. Now, an example here might be, instead of saying, I'm going to exercise 5 times a week for 52 weeks of the year, and let's imagine you've never worked out before, you can reframe that to a principle that you use for the rest of your life of, I'm going to prioritize daily movement and healthier choices. And that may just be going for a walk for 20, 30 minutes and eating an apple or banana instead of a chocolate bar. They're subtle and small, but they can be enduring. The number 3 is keep them visible. Principles aren't something that you write down on a company performance review that goes into a system and you don't see again until the next year. This happens with a lot of goals too sometimes because people don't take the time to reflect and revisit. Look at principles as living reminders. So they're not ideas that you're just going to write down once and forget. Keep them top of mind by placing them in visible spots. Personally, I have mine on a chalkboard that you can't see next to me right now on my desk. And I also have it in a notes app on my phone. Okay, 4. Hopefully this is pretty obvious from what we've spoken about with goals versus principles, but we'll cover it anyway. Don't be afraid to change them. Life changes, and so should your principles. Stuff happens all the time. Problem with goals is they always have this win or lose mentality, whereas with principles, they're more aligned to how life plays out. If the priorities in your life change, don't be afraid to adapt your principles. Of course, you can do this with goals too, but not too many do that. And there's no need to be trapped by that. So if you are still using goals and you think goals are a good framework for you, of course, try that as well. And then lastly, use them daily. Like most things in life, principles aren't going to be useful to you if you don't use them. They guide you on not just what you do, but how you approach decisions. So when faced with a choice, always ask which option aligns most with your principles. Now look, none of this is easy. It's not a magic potion either. It is an alternative to the norm, and if you've been hitting brick walls with goals, it might be worth a look. Remember, life is never about perfection. Being consistent and intentional is always going to be the best that each of us can do. Principles aren't going to be for everyone, and I know that, and you need to recognize that as well. But no matter your method, I hope we can come back in 12 months from now and share our stories on what's been achieved. I hope it's been helpful, and I will speak to you in the next one.